It's 10 away from 8 now at breakfast this Wednesday. Good for them too. It'll draw a lot of attention calling it a Nutters Conference. The New Zealand Listeners just published its 2006 Power List, the top 50 most influential people in the country, or so the listener says. So who's got the power to decide who's powerful? And how influential is the list itself? To discuss this, I'm joined by media commentators Irene, Gardiner and Wayne Hope. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Good morning.
The MBR does the rich list, and of course that's slightly easier because at least they can calculate people's wealth. So, I mean, they may get it slightly wrong, but you have something which is tangible. Power is not as tangible, is it?
No, it's not. It's a very difficult thing to calibrate. I mean, the listeners saying they've done it on, you know, how much these people are influencing us. I don't know. I'm a little bit cynical on
Well, you
this
don't
one.
like the whole idea, do you?
Not especially. I think it's a very odd form of journalism.
I like your original idea, Paul, having a rich list, and then a list of top 10 political movers and shakers, and then cultural movers and shakers, and then discuss that feature by feature by feature.
Because there's too much ambiguity in the word power.
Yes, and what the listener thing does is it confuses publicity with influence. So there's people in here that have got public profile, like Ian Wishart and so on, but they're not as strong in terms of their power as others.
But then that's where the ambiguity comes in, isn't it? Because influence does give you power to a degree. Anyway, let's have a look at the list, because we could argue about it forever, and probably will. I'm quite pleased to see Helen Clark at number 1. It's hard to argue.
It's hard to argue against.
And it's I think a healthy country has the Prime Minister there at number 1, or very close, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Number 6, Peter Jackson.
Yeah, see, I think that's a funny one. I mean, he's fabulously talented, he's fabulously wealthy, but does he actually have a lot of influence over day-to-day New Zealand?
And I would have thought, even although he's fallen 1 point since last year, 1 place, I would have thought that he would have fallen significantly more than that.
I mean, I think
he has more influence with New Line Cinema and the movers and shakers in Hollywood. His moving and shaking is kind of outside of the country, if you like.
Yeah, and as a powerful person in New Zealand, I wouldn't have thought.
But that raises a point. I think, in general, entertainment people and media people are overrepresented in the list, which is possibly because it's journalists.
And again, it's profile, isn't it? They're saying profile, with profile comes power.
Politicians are overdone too. I wouldn't have the Finance Minister as number 2. I'd have Bollard as number 2.
Yeah, well, now there's an interesting one. But first of all, Sam Morgan came in at number 4.
Well, he's given up his economic power to Fairfax, so he shouldn't be in there at all.
Well, and how much power does Sam Morgan have?
Yeah, again...
Well, that's my point. I mean, he gave away his economic power.
I think that's
and
wealth,
he's still
not
listed.
Power.
All right, John Key and Don Brash at 8 and 9. Those positions may well change over the next, few days.
The list is rather dated already, I think.
That's the danger of this sort of thing.
I think Don might not be as high as he was in the early 90s when he was Reserve Bank Governor himself.
Yes.
And if the list is done next year, he may not figure.
You mentioned Alan Bollard. I mean, Alan Bollard comes in at 10.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Significantly less powerful people than him higher than that.
Absolutely.
Look, the point, and since the Reserve Bank Act of '89, finance ministers have lost most of their power, and the Reserve Bank Governor has most of the economic power when it comes to putting in policy settings. That's just the reality. And yet Bollard's way down there. I mean, this is the problem that Irene pointed to. Too much emphasis on publicity and not enough emphasis on the people who really push the levers of power.
Although, having said that, and I accept that and I agree with it, there is power that comes with profile.
Oh, yes.
And that is why you have your hype. I mean, a good argument is if someone with profile says something exactly the same as someone without, that will be reported.
Syriad's a classic example of that. Somebody like that.
The funny thing about that, though, there's also a sort of an opposite to that, which is there are some people who actually are very powerful behind the scenes, but part of doing that is keeping a low profile. I think there was an example you had, someone from PR.
Well, PR is, you know, is the oil that greases the wheels in New Zealand politics and corporate life, and the most powerful PR consultants firms, you know, Saunders and Unsworth. Barry Saunders is a very influential man. He constructs dossiers on MPs so that...
But is he the person with the power, or is it the person that commissions him?
Well, I went through the website and he's the most senior figure in the organisation.
And doesn't appear on the
they call them beltway lobbyists in the United States. They have corporate clients and political clients, and they play both ends off against the middle.
And that's what I'm wondering, is it the client that is the person with the real power, or the person that they are manipulating?
Well, the client needs the lobbyist and the PR consultant. I mean, somebody like that should be in there.
Yeah, all right, let's flick through. At 14, Paula Rebstock. Now, that I agree with. I think that this is about the right position for her. I think she has a great deal of power. Sir Edmund Hillary's at 19. I don't know.
Well, that's our earlier point, having separate lists.
Yeah,
if you're talking about cultural power and influence, then he would be right up there.
It always worries me, Heather Simpson's position on this list of power. I don't argue with it, but it worries me. She's coming at 24, so she's dropped...
Some people might put her at 1 equal.
Or just at 1.
I think there's a misunderstanding in the media about Heather Simpson's influence. I mean, there's other people as well, like Mike Munro and so on. It's not just about her.
Since the list has been produced, 93 people have been in the top 50 over the years since they've been producing the list, of which 85% have been male. 85% of the most powerful people in the country have been male, 18% have been Māori, and only 10, and this is the most interesting of all those figures, only 10% have come from the South Island. Now, what does that say?
No power in the South Island.
No power at all.
Well, it reflects that Auckland is where the motor is in terms of power, apart from Wellington and the politics and so on. Another important point, though, there's more and more people based overseas, non-New Zealanders, who have influence over our country. I'd like a list of those kind of people. Like the CEOs of Westpac and ANZ. They have big influence over New Zealanders' lives.
And are based overseas, as you say. All right, very quickly, the most interesting one on the list for you.
Ooh.
All right, I'll go to you first, Irene. Because very quickly didn't work, did it?
It wasn't as interesting as I thought.
I was intrigued with Tim Murphy from the Herald being at 17, more for the justification they wrote there. I don't necessarily dispute that because I think that's a leading paper.
No, but they did seem like they were struggling to justify it.
But they were talking about, you know, the Herald doing some campaigning journalism and leading the way.
Yeah.
Which I think is sort of true, but I think some people would also debate that.
Yeah. All right, and for me, it was Garth McVicar at 32. I thought that was interesting, having him on there. All right, then, Wayne Hope, Irene Gardiner, thank you very much for joining us.
OK.